Hey YouTube, Kirswick here, bringing you all an update to my Ancient Gear Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile for January 2023. Been wanting to update the Ancient Gears for a while now. It focuses on the Ancient Gear Golem archetype, focusing on fusion summon of many of the Ancient Gear monsters. This was the deck used by Dr. Crowler in the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX series. It does feel like it's been a while since we've gotten some support for the deck, but we did get a card that definitely does help with the machine playstyle for the Ancient Gears in the Battles of Legend Crystal Revenge booster set. Maybe we'll get a new Link monster, a new fusion for the deck, but until then, I wanted to update it with some of the changes I've made to the deck as well. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with the main deck monsters. For the Ancient Gear Golem, I'm running 2 copies of the card. It cannot be special summoned if this card attacks a defense position monster. Inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. If it attacks, your opponent cannot activate spell or traps until the end of damage step. It is a 3,000 attack point boss monster, but also used for a good majority of our fusion monsters, including Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem, and then also just being able to use for some of the pretty generic fusions like Ancient Gear Howitzer, since it just needs cards like Ancient Gear monsters to be summoned out. I also run 1 copy of Ancient Gear Golem Ultimate Pound and 1 Ancient Gear Reactor Dragon for more of the boss monster options, with each one having the spell and trap restriction with Reactor Dragon. And if it was tribute summoned by tributing an Ancient Gear monster and attacks the defense monster, you have the piercing battle damage. And also, if this card was tributed by tributing a gadget monster, it can make a second attack during each battle phase. If it attacks with the spell and traps, cannot be activated. At the end of the damage step, if it attacked, you can destroy 1 spell or trap on the field. So we don't run any gadgets in the deck, but it's still used for more of the destruction of your opponent's spell and traps. And then Ultimate Pound being the use to add a polymerization from our deck to our hand to then use for some of the fusion plays if it's destroyed by battle or a card effect. And then up to twice per turn, when this attacking card destroys a monster, you can discard a machine monster and it can attack again, giving you more and more attack options with this monster. Also, for some of the bigger numbers for the lower level monsters, we're running 3 copies of Ancient Gear Frame. You can discard 1 card to add 1 Ancient Gear Golem, or 1 spell or trap that specifically lists Ancient Gear Golem in its text from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Ancient Gear Frame once per turn. If this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate spell or traps till the end of damage step. And if this face-up card in its owner's control leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect, you can special summon up to 3 Ancient Gear Golem and or Ancient Gear Golem Ultimate Pound from your hand, ignoring their summoning conditions. So just being able to get out some of the bigger boss monsters we spoke of before using Frame, but also having this card as a searcher definitely does make it a 3 of in the deck. Just being able to add any of these spell or traps that also include Ancient Gear Golem in its card text gives you more of a search option for some of the more important cards that we run in the deck, which we'll get to when we go over the spells. For some of the other 3-ofs for the monsters, I also run 3 copies of Ancient Gear Hunting Hound. With this card, if it's normal summon, inflict 600 damage to your opponent. If this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate spell or traps until end of damage step. And once per turn, you can fusion summon 1 Ancient Gear Fusion monster from your X deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. So Hunting Hound can be used just to easily summon out Ancient Gear Howitzer, just needing 2 Ancient Gear monsters. And you can even use itself as that play, and then just normal summoning it to do a little burn damage could be the make or break scenario that makes it so you at least win against your opponent if you do have to go into time at a local event. And I also run 2 copies of Ancient Gear Wyvern. If it's normal or special summon, you can add 1 Ancient Gear card from your deck to your hand, except for Ancient Gear Wyvern. Also, you cannot set cards for the rest of this turn. You can only use this effect of Wyvern once per turn. If this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate monster effects until the end of damage step. It's a searcher. The 1 card you'll want to search out with Ancient Gear Wyvern is Ancient Gear Box, which we're also running 1 copy of. If it's added from your deck or graveyard to your hand, except by drawing it, you can add 1 Earth Machine type monster with 500 attack or defense from your deck to your hand, except for Ancient Gear Box. And then you can only use this effect of Ancient Gear Box once per turn. So this is another search for Ancient Gear Frame, since Ancient Gear Frame has 500 defense. So you just have an easy search thanks to this card in the deck. And lastly, for the monsters, 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. It's a pretty small monster engine, but it all works very, very well together for your play setup. This is just an additional card to use for you to be able to set up more and more of your cards on the field by stopping your opponent and any of their plays they may try to use. Moving on now to the spells, I run 3 copies of Ancient Gear Catapult. While you control no monsters, target one face-up card you control, destroy it, and if you do special summon one Ancient Gear monster from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions, you can banish this card from your graveyard and target one face-up card you control, destroy it, and if you do special summon one Ancient Gear token onto the field, you can only use one Ancient Gear Catapult effect per turn, and only once that turn. So the main card you can destroy with this card would be your Gear Town, because then you'll get the additional special summon off of Gear Town when it's destroyed, and the token allows you to at least go into some other options like your Ancient Gear Ballista, which only needs 2 Earth Machine monsters to make. I also run 2 copies of Ancient Gear Fusion. You fusion summon one Ancient Gear Fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. If you use Ancient Gear Golem or Ancient Gear Golem Ultimate Pound, you control its fusion material. You can also use monsters from your deck as material. So this can be searched out with your Ancient Gear frame, since it does have Ancient Gear Golem in its card text. So just an easy search for your fusion spell to your hand for you to use. I also run 2 copies of Gear Town and 1 copy of Terraforming. If you want to run 3 copies of Gear Town, you can just remove the 1 copy of Terraforming that I run for an additional 1. Both players can tribute summon Ancient Gear monsters with 1 less tribute than required. When this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 Ancient Gear monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard. So this could be destroyed with your Ancient Gear Catapult, and then just have your play used for Ancient Gear Catapult along with Gear Town to give you more and more special summons of your Ancient Gear monsters on the field. And I also run 2 copies of Ancient Gear Fortress. Now, this card definitely does help for the overall combo play for you to be able to use it during the turn they were normal or special summon. Your opponent cannot target Ancient Gear monsters you control with card effects, and they cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Your opponent cannot activate the card effects in response to the activation of Ancient Gear cards and effects. And if this card is destroyed in the spell and trap card zone, you can special summon 1 Ancient Gear monster from your hand or graveyard, and you cannot special summon for the rest of this turn except for Ancient Gear monsters. Another card option as well for you to destroy with Ancient Gear Catapult, but it gives you more of a protection for any of the big Ancient Gear plays you may want to go into against your opponent. The fusion plays are a big investment with how many monsters you'll use to summon them out onto the field, so at least having it so your opponent cannot target them with card effects is one of the better plays to use as protection with Ancient Gear Fortress. Some of the new cards that I am testing out from the Crystal Revenge booster set is 2 copies of Clockwork Knight. All face-up monsters on the field become machine monsters. Machine monsters you control gain 500 attack and defense. Also, machine monsters your opponent control lose 500 attack and defense. And you can banish this card from your graveyard and discard 1 card to add 1 Earth Machine monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Clockwork Knight once per turn, and you can only activate 1 Clockwork Knight per turn. So this card, when it's in the graveyard, can give you a search for any of your Ancient Gear Golem monsters, since they are Earth attribute monsters, to be added to your hand. It has to be in the graveyard for the banish setup, so even if you do open it up in your hand and activate it, you at least have the play to disrupt any of your opponent's extra deck plays they may have tried to go for, since all the monsters they have would be machine type monsters to use. And also, it can be a target for your Ancient Gear Catapult, since it just says to target a face-up card you control. So you can destroy Clockwork Knight with your Ancient Gear Catapult and then have it in the graveyard for you to use for the banish. If you wanted to get it into the graveyard a little faster, I run 2 copies of Foolish Burial Goods just for the send to the graveyard option with this card, to then banish Clockwork Knight with the discard to get, let's just say, the proper Ancient Gear card from your hand, because then you could use it to add your Ancient Gear Wyvern to your hand and then have that search ready to go. For some of the one-ofs that I run for the spells, 1 copy of Call by the Grave, 1 Limiter Removal, 1 Ancient Gear Workshop. I do like this card because you can just add some of the other cards you may have used for the engine already, like Ancient Gear Box, back to your hand and activate this card after you searched it with Ancient Gear Workshop. Also, the 1 Polymerization for the Ancient Gear Ultimate Pound, and the 1 Overload Fusion. The fusion we will go for with this card is our Chaos Ancient Gear Giant, since it is the only dark attribute Ancient Gear monster that we will summon out, and it needs it to summon out a dark fusion monster, which then you can also use by banishing those resources in the graveyard. So Ancient Gear Chaos Giant is more of less the finishing boss monster that you can go into late game. for the traps, I run 2 copies of Ancient Gear Reborn. Once per turn, if you control no monsters, you can target 1 Ancient Gear monster in your graveyard, special summon it, and if you do, gain 200 attack. Even if this card leaves the field, you can only control 1 Ancient Gear Reborn, but still, just a better special summon option if you have no resources to at least start over with some of the cards you may have on your field for you to use. With the last of the traps being 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, just another hand trap option, just like Ash Blossom and Joy Spring, in the deck for you to stop your opponent during the turns they go first. Because going second with the Ancient Gear deck is definitely a recommended choice, so you can hit your opponent hard with the fusion monsters that you can make. And that is it for the main deck. Moving on now to the extra deck. Running 2 copies of Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem. You need an Ancient Gear Golem and 2 Ancient Gear monsters to summon it. This monster cannot be special summoned except by fusion summon. Also, with this card, when it battles a defense monster, you inflict piercing battle damage. If this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate spell or traps until the end of damage step. And if it's destroyed, you can special summon 1 Ancient Gear Golem from your graveyard, ignoring its summoning condition. So even if this card does leave the field, you at least have the play to get an Ancient Gear Golem back onto the field for you to use against your opponent. A really, really strong monster for the fact that it also just has 4,400 attack and can be one of the bigger fusions you go into to go up against your opponent. I also run 2 copies of Ancient Gear Howitzer. For one of the easier fusions to make, it just needs 2 Ancient Gear monsters, and it can also be used with Hunting Hound for the fusion play. It's unaffected by other cards, and also during the main phase, you can inflict 1,000 damage to your opponent. You can only use this effect of Ancient Gear Howitzer once per turn. If this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 Ancient Gear monster from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. Ignoring the summoning conditions is definitely important with your Ancient Gear monsters, so you can at least special summon out some of the bigger monsters, even if they have a special summon restriction. I also run 1 copy of Ancient Gear Megaton Golem and 1 Ancient Gear Giant. More plays with both. Ancient Gear Giant, like I said, is the late game power play, needing 3 monsters for Megaton Golem and 4 for Ancient Gear Chaos Giant. With this card, it can attack your opponent. Your opponent cannot activate spell or trap cards until the end of damage step, and if this card is fusion summoned using 3 or more Ancient Gear Golem and or Ancient Gear Golem Ultimate Pound as material, it can attack up to that many times during the battle phase. So more of a quick finish against your opponent using both of these cards, depending on which one you want to use against your opponent. Also, Chaos Ancient Gear Giant is unaffected by spell or traps, and your opponent's monsters cannot activate their effects during the battle phase. So you can hit over a good majority of monsters that your opponent may have set up already on the field. For the Link monsters, I run 2 copies of Ancient Gear Ballista, needing 2 Earth Machine monsters. If it's Link summon, you can add 1 Ancient Gear monster and 1 Gear Town from your deck to your hand. You can target 1 spell or trap you control, and when face a monster your opponent controls, destroy that target you control, and if you do, change that opponent's monster's attack and defense to 0 until the end of this turn. You can only use each effect of Ballista once per turn. So with this card being able to reduce your opponent's monster's attack and defense to 0, you can hit pretty hard against them with cards like your Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem. What's also great about Ballista is one of the other Link monsters we run, needing just 2 Earth Machine monsters to make it. So then you can even go for cards like Mrs. Radiant and also Asa, the Earth Charmer Removable, to use Asa to take your opponent's monster, because then using cards like our Clockwork Knight to make all the monsters on the field machine, if they are an Earth monster and they're still a machine monster, you can then use that monster of your opponent's to summon out your Ancient Gear Ballista. We also run the 1 Barricade Board Blocker, 1 Nightmare Unicorn as well to finish off the Link monsters. And for the Xyz monsters, 1 copy of Gear Gigant X, 1 number 38, and 1 Zeus. As another machine option in the deck, but also for the fact that you can overlay your go-to monsters with number 38, and then just go into Zeus if you attacked with the number 38 on the field. As for some of the go-to plays in the deck, once again with the new card from Crystal Revenge, if you use Foolish Burial Goods to send Clockwork Knight to the graveyard, and then also you can banish this card from your graveyard and then discard 1 card. So depending on what you discard, you can even set up another Ancient Gear monster that just might have been too high of a level in your hand to use for early game resources. With that discard, you can then search for a more proper card to use for the normal summon. So if you summon out Ancient Gear Wyvern, and when it's normal or special summon to add an Ancient Gear card from your deck to your hand, you can then use it to add your Ancient Gear box. And if this card's added from the deck or graveyard to your hand, you can add an Earth Machine type monster as well, which then you can use by adding your Ancient Gear frame. With that, you have 3 Ancient Gear monsters ready in your hand for you to use, and you can discard Ancient Gear frame to add 1 Ancient Gear Golem or spell or trap that specifically lists it from your deck to your hand. So then you can discard the Ancient Gear frame that you added to your hand to add cards like Ancient Gear Fusion, which then you're ready to go with your fusion play right then and there. All thanks to the easy search of the new card we got from the Crystal Revenge booster sets. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. Like I said, I wanted to update the deck. The new stuff was looking pretty interesting from the Crystal Revenge booster set, so definitely give the deck a chance if you're a fan of, Dr. Crowler from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX and all his many Ancient Gear monsters. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.